Hello, hello. Please, if you can hear me, kindly post in the chat column. You have the option to post in the chat column down the stream. If you're on YouTube, if you're on YouTube. Okay. Think people can hear me. Okay, that's fine. Please then log on to YouTube. YouTube is better. Please log on to YouTube. Okay, that's fine. Since everyone can hear me, I think that is okay. So though this is a syllabus walkthrough, we are going to learn a lot of things. Is that okay? So I want you to brace yourselves as we go through this exciting adventure together. I hope the voice is very clear. If it's not that clear, kindly alert me so that I switch to a better microphone. Is the voice very clear? Hello? Okay. So you are all welcome to the August 2023 CIT exam technique and syllabus walkthrough. Usually we do this before we actually start the main class because it's very important so that students will know exactly what they are supposed to know. Is that okay? So I will share my screen, then we see the syllabus and know exactly what we have to know. Okay, so I'll share my entire screen first. You can see my screen. Think it's still buffering. Okay. I hope you can all see my screen. I hope you can all see my screen. Okay. So one of the key things that I want you to know is what is required of you. Now you can see that the syllabus here states August 2011. That is the last time the syllabus was updated. I think it's going to be updated again, but now there are some changes that as a student you don't have to wait. For instance, if there's an amendment, I get in it, you have to know them, okay, because you are doing tax. And now, these are some of the things that you require to go into CIT. It says what? In order to be registered as a student for the professional examinations of the institute, one must be at least 18 years old and have the following minimum academic qualifications. Okay, so a first degree from a recognized tertiary institution, the taxation technician certificate of the institute, which I think now I don't think they are running that again, but I think they will again sometime in the future. I don't know. If you have an HND, you have basic professional certificate in taxation from GRA, there are some exemptions for you, and any other qualification like MBA and other things that I get in it you can use. Now, students have 10 years to complete the final examinations of the institute from the date of their registration. So you have up until 10 years. After 10 years, it will be scrapped off and you can start again. Okay, every paper you've passed will be null and void. Okay, so that is just by the way. Now, we are going to look at the structure of the examination. Now, the institute professional examination syllabus is examined at 3 levels. Okay, the professional level, final level 1, and final level 2. Now, students may attempt any number of papers in the professional level and final level 1. However, the professional level must be completed or exemption obtained before final level 1 is attempted. And the final level 1 must be completed or exemption must be obtained before final level 2 is attempted. Now, this is one thing you must understand. If you're exempted from the professional level, fine. If you are not exempted, you need to write. And that is where the issue is. The papers at the professional level are very, how do I say it? They are actually very professional. That is where you do the proper tax and accounting. Why am I saying this? The professional level is like you are actually an account manager. Let's say that, right? You do the proper accounting. So at this level, the papers you mostly have are quite detailed. And because a lot of people have exemption from these papers, they struggle a lot at final level 1 and final level 2. And I'll come and explain why they struggle. Okay. Now, all the papers at the final level 2 must be sat and passed at the same examination session. So this is a requirement, and people don't like this. For me, I think it is a motivating factor. You have to sit all the three and pass. If not, you write. Or you may be referred in one paper at final level 2 if you obtain a minimum of 40 in that paper and passes the other 2 papers. However, if you fail below 40, you have to write all the 3 papers again. And this is what is killing people. So if you write final level 2, you have to write all 3. Now, if you fail any one below 40, you have to write all the 3 again. That is what bad failure, right? So the pass mark for every paper is 50%, almost for all professional qualifications, except some of them where the pass mark is 75. And those ones are quite complex. But for CITICA and the likes of them, it's 50. Now, the professional level consists of 6 papers. We have public sector economics and finance. Okay. We have income taxation. We have accounting and finance, indirect taxation, revenue and business law, strategy, and governance. Now, some of these papers are build-ups into final level 1 and final level 2. For instance, you need income taxation for international tax, for tax audit, and for oil and gas. So people who don't have idea about income taxes or have a shallow knowledge of income taxes, particularly the computation of chargeable income, foreign tax credits, business taxation, and anti-avoidance provisions will mostly face problems in either of those papers. Then when it comes to accounting and finance, it will help those doing tax audit and oil and gas. Okay, so the papers, they are not just given, but they are build-ups. Indirect taxation, you need mostly for tax audit at final level 1. Is that okay? Is it understood? So that is one of the things you need to look at. Revenue and business law you need for tax audit at final level 1. The reason why you are doing some of these courses is so that you get the overall overview of the syllabus. Now, if you've got exemption, what are the things you need to do? Because I've realized that when people get exemption, that is it, they end there. They just progress forward. But go back, not to learn, but to look at the course content for what you have missed and what you will be required to know at the level you are starting at. This has been some of the reasons why people are failing, but they don't know that it is the reason they are failing, and they can't admit to the reason why they are failing. And that is a big problem. Is that okay? So we have seen the 6 courses, and it says what? At this level, the syllabus concentrates mainly on the theories and techniques which underlie practical issues to be examined at what? Later levels. So you see, so the practical issues to be examined at later levels, this is the basis. So if you don't know the basis, when you get to the more practical issues, not the theories and techniques, you start having problems. And people will say, oh, you are just talking. It is not true. Me, I passed my paper. Fine, you are smart. What about the other average students? What about them? You see, if you want to make the best out of this course, the thing is, I know majority of people, 98% of people taking CIT and ICA are busy. They are workers. Some of them are even partners in audit firms and other places. They are managers, CFOs, and other big men and women. But the thing is, once you've dedicated yourself to something, just go through. It shouldn't take much time for you to complete if you use the right strategies. And those are some of the strategies that my team and I are going to take you through. Just make sure you have your notepad or a simple notebook as we walk through the syllabus, look at requirements, and look at best ways you can what utilize the materials in your arsenal to actually crack this code once and for all. Now, we've seen the professional level. Now, when it comes to final level one, these are the courses. We have tax audit and investigations, oil, gas, and other mineral taxation. Some people just say oil and gas, but there's other minerals taxation there. So if one time you go to the exam and they start bringing bauxite, they start bringing issues on other minerals, don't be confused because it's not just oil and gas. Just that sometimes they want to make the thing a bit soft so that people can actually be comfortable in answering them. This syllabus even has what we call petroleum economics, but because petroleum economics is a bit specialized, it's a specialized area. The examiner will not really, worry you with that area, but there are bits and pieces of some things that you don't consider necessary, which I think is necessary if you have to pass. Then there comes what people fear the most: international tax. You should start fearing tax audit more than international tax. And the reason why people fail this paper a lot is because of complacency. I'll tell you the truth. One is complacency. Two, lack of proper guidance. Now, note that this paper is pure practical, and you need some things to be able to what to pass and pass well. Now, tax audit requires some skill sets. Tax audit requires some skill sets, and these skill sets are mostly around four areas. So when you are doing tax audit, you need skill sets in particular areas like tax. You need audit. You need law, that's business law, and you need accounting. Now, these are the four building blocks of your tax audit paper. If you are not so strong around these areas, please don't try, because you are going to find it very difficult. So I try to tell students that you see something, it's not that it's difficult, but you need the right guide. It has always been about the right guide. Okay, so for instance, they'll ask a student, what is audit risk? Then they'll start talking about inherent risk, control risk, detection risk. You are wrong. No, that is not tax audit. That is audit in general. Yeah, sure. If you are talking about audit risk, you can talk about inherent risk, control risk, and detection risk. But those are just elements that lead to audit risk. They are not the audit risks themselves. It's like when you are doing strategy and they ask you that give some growth strategies, then you say market penetration, market development. Those are not the actual strategies, but what you do under them. So under tax audit, risk can be seen from two perspectives: from the perspective of the taxpayer and from the perspective of the tax administration. From the administration, it's either, that's if I talk about tax administration, I'm talking about GRA. It's either the taxpayer has inaccurate records, that means your records are not proper or they are not complete, or two, you are misrepresenting the tax law. So, two risks: risk of misrepresentation of the tax law and risk of inaccurate records. Now, that is the risk that the tax authorities consider as tax audit risk. Now, from the perspective of the taxpayer, you have obligations under the law which you have to fulfill, right? Every taxpayer must register with the authority, must file their returns, declare their income, and pay taxes. Now, if anything else goes wrong with this process, then we say there's a tax audit risk. So, when you're doing a risk assessment under tax audit, you must categorize the risk as a taxpayer risk. So it can be registration risk, that is failure to register or being registered wrongly, right? So you see, if you have inaccurate records, right, it could be due to either of the inherent control and detection risk we talked about. Those things are the elements of every audit risk. So if it could be that you have poor controls, that's why you don't have proper records. That is why you have been registered wrongly by GRA. That is a registration risk, right? So not registering or being registered wrongly, you didn't hit 200,000 threshold, but your returns and your records show that you've hit 200,000 revenue. Because of that, you have to register for VAT. Meanwhile, you are not actually supposed to register for VAT. and it ends up killing your business. Then you start lacking working capital. Okay, these are all risks you consider. People just stay out of the registration system to evade taxes, right? Now, secondly, another issue is filing risk. You register, you must file. Failure to file on the due date is a filing risk. Not filing at all is a filing risk. Okay, so all these things you must consider them. They are risks, right? How do you manage the risks as an auditor? So basically, tax audit is about what? Determining this risk and bringing up or determining responses or coming up with responses to those risks. And the responses to those risks is the audit procedures. So 60% of the exam mostly comes from audit procedures. If you have actually sat the paper before, you realize that 60% of the exam comes from audit procedures or audit programs or audit strategy or risk responses. I've been telling people, they still don't listen. So this paper is one of the most failed papers now because people think it's just like ICA audit. No, it's not. There's difference. Here, you need to go deeper. You need to go deeper. So we are talking about assurance engagement, not just assurance engagement. How do you conduct an audit investigation, which we call a back duty? How do you conduct fraud investigation? How do you do compliance checks? How do you do forensic investigation? What is a forensic report? How is it written? Okay, so these things people ignore them, but these are the things that you need to pass this paper. You see, I just talked about audit risk. Somebody would have just focused on here inherent risk, control risk, and detection risk, and that will not get you your marks. Trust me. So that is just a bit about tax audit and its perspective. Okay, so don't be complacent when it comes to audit. Today, I'm an auditor, and it's funny that it's the auditors who are actually failing tax audit. Because some people are like, I've been doing audit. I don't know why I'm not getting this paper. Yes, it's because you are being complacent. Go and read the proper procedure. You're like, oh, I have an audit program at work, so I use that one for my exam. No, you are doing statutory audit procedures, tax audit. We want the thing. You are doing repairs and improvements. Okay, you have checked whether it has gone to P&L, what you've done, all that. But then you didn't relate it to taxation. You should tell us, has the repairs been computed in line with Section 12 of the Income Tax Act? Ensure repairs have been adequately what provided for. Recompute the repair expense to the profit and loss, and the one that the excess repairs to be capitalized in accordance with Section 12. Now it tells them that you're adding a spice of taxation to your procedures. This is what we don't see. It's not that you just write raw procedures and you expect to pass tax audit. Who told you that? Sometimes people are lucky, sometimes they are not. Okay. Now, when it comes to oil and gas, people have the notion, oh, this paper is easy. This paper is easy. Oh, just master the two calculations at question 4 and question 5 and you are gone. No. Because if question 4 and question 5 are just 40 marks, what about the 60, the theory? Why don't you rather crack the theory? You get it? So if you put your hopes on the theory, rather, you have a chance of passing. But people are like, oh, focus on the two calculations that will come. What if the calculations are changed? Because 2 days ago, the calculations changed. What can you say about that too? So you see, it's not just about knowing the strategies, but also knowing exactly what they want from you. They tell you write short notes, then you write 5 lines. No, it should be at least half a page. That is what they want. These things you should be writing them down. Oh. There are some things that you should take very seriously. Is that okay? So these are the 3 papers: tax audit, oil and gas, and international tax. Now, I've highlighted tax audit because it is the most failed paper. Now, it says what? Tax audit and investigation. The name of the paper is actually tax audit and special investigation. So it is broken into 2. And every single night, you are going to get questions from these areas, from tax audit and a bit from investigations, whether you like it or not. Okay, so from there, we have oil and gas, we have international taxation. And international tax, I'll reserve time to talk about it personally, but not now. So this is the final level 1, and this level actually develops analytical skills and intends to equip the student with knowledge of key subjects necessary to the chartered tax practitioner, meaning that as a chartered tax practitioner, you have to have knowledge around these areas. Though some are specialized areas, you need to first have a general knowledge about them because you may be working as a tax practitioner. You may always be working under issues. You meet auditors. Auditors who come and work. You can also work as an auditor yourself. So you need some of these knowledge. Is that okay? So that is it. Now, the next thing we have to look at is the final level two. And people fear final level two a lot, but I think you should rather be happy at final level two because when you look at the final level one courses, they are mostly not related that much. But when you look at final level two, every single paper is interrelated. But the problem I have with students is they learn everything in isolation. If you do that, you will fail. If you do that, you are going to fail. You are not supposed to learn them in isolation. You are supposed to learn them together. Bring ideas, right? Bring ideas. Put ideas together. That is what we are looking at. So when you put ideas together, you realize that wow, these papers I'm doing are actually related. Yes, of course. If you are doing tax planning here, you are going to see tax planning under advanced tax practice, but it won't come as how it comes under strategic tax planning. For instance, you are learning about industry concessions and industrial tax rates. Maybe if you have a cattle farm, you are paying only 1% tax for 10 years, not so, or maybe you are in the hospitality industry, you are paying tax at 22%. At the strategic tax planning level, it's more of advisory. You are going to be advising. At the advanced tax practice level, this same thing can come, the hospitality, but it will come as a computation and you have to determine the rate which you are going to use to multiply the chargeable income and maybe deduct some withholding tax credits and stuff like that. You get it? Now, at tax advanced tax practice and administration level, this same thing will come, but here you'll be using it to fill returns. You get it? So just know the thing. I get it, and know the different ways it can be examined. That's how we learn final level two. But most people take it as something separate. You can learn them separately and put them together. That makes sense. Or learn them together and later separate them. That also makes sense. But learning them all differently and not trying to link ideas is not the best way to pass this paper. If you really want to crack final level two first attempt, learn to link them. You learn partnership under strategic tax planning, try to apply it to advanced tax practice. Don't learn partnership separately here and learn them. That way you can't really get the idea because it's two separate concepts. Meanwhile, it is not. Some people go to the tax practice administration exam and they are writing, then they see residents, they're like, hey, where's work at tax practice administration? Well, yes, of course. You must be a resident to get all these things. You must be a resident for the tax authorities to fight you and take their money, right? You go and meet something that should have been a strategic tax planning. You're like, hey, there's one guy that free zone came in strategic tax planning, came in advanced tax practice, and came under tax practice administration, all under different settings. The same date. You go and sit advanced tax practice and they are asking you something about international taxation and you're like, hey, this into is a part. Yes, of course, double taxation is part of advanced tax practice. Tax is tax. It doesn't matter where they examine it. Your duty as a student is to know. That's why I tell you, don't learn them in isolation. Some people say, okay, I'm just registering for this paper, the rest I'll learn at home. No, take the leap of faith. Learn. Don't make excuses. Just pass once and for all. People like to write, come back and write again. Total practice, total quality management. Get it right the first time. Get it what? More right the next time. Continuous improvement. Okay, so these are the papers at the three levels. Now we will be going in depth, but before we start, I would ask some few questions where you can post in the chat column. Okay, but now I have to read this quickly so that you know what we are talking about. It says what? At the final level, students are required to demonstrate not only that they have grasped the requisite skills, techniques, and knowledge, but also that they can apply them in practical context. At these levels, the student is to establish proof of competence to practice as a professional chartered practitioner, chartered tax practitioner, sorry, and be able to occupy managerial and strategic positions in commerce, industry, public sector, and public practice. That is why we were doing all those courses. The final level 2 is not subjected to exemption, no matter the prior qualification the student might have acquired. So, no matter where you come from, no exemption from final level 2. So at the final levels, the subjects are structured in a way that emphasis is given to practical issues, criticism of current development in taxation, and handling of tax planning and administration issues. So most of the time, you are going to meet current developments. Okay. So any new thing that is happening, which is the trending topic in taxation, you always have to be abreast with it. Because sometimes you go, the time they talked about custom transit trade, you went there, the custom transit trade came to the exam. When tax amnesty came, you went, tax amnesty was there. Tax appeals board, you went, it was there. So any trending issue, make sure you are aware of it because you don't know when you are going to meet it. So as the VAT rules have changed, income tax, I think the amendment will be implemented soon. They are going to be examined after 6 months to 1 year. They will come. Okay, so there are some issues at the final level. You just have to be open. Anything which is happening mostly in the tax environment around GRA or policies that are coming, filing online, those things, you must be so abreast with them because those are the things that they are going to be asking you. Are you getting it? Then another thing that I want to talk about is preparation of what we call professional communication. When we talk about professional communication, we are talking about being able to write professional reports, memorandum, briefing paper, discussion paper, advice, outline, presentation, communication, letters. This is what we call professional communication. Now, all your papers may require you to prepare what? Professional communication. You must know the structure of all these things, okay? Which I'll talk about. That's the last thing I'll talk about before we end the session. How to prepare all of this. What do we mean by a discussion paper? What do we mean by a memo? What do we mean by a report? What do we mean by a briefing note or a briefing paper? What do we mean by an advice? What do we mean by an outline? What do we mean by a presentation? Okay, so professional communication is very important because at our level, that is what we'll mostly be preparing when we meet clients. Okay, so in the exam, the examiner requires you to do just that. Okay, so that is the first section. I will now open the room for some questions. You can post your questions in the chat column. So, yes, who has a question for me? You can post it in the chat column for me. You can post it in the chat column for me. Hello, can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yes. Who has any question for me? I want to answer the questions before we proceed. I want to answer the questions before we proceed. I will want to answer the questions before we proceed. He said, I made mention for exemptions in final level 1. Is it are you saying what are the requirements or why are the requirements? So what are the requirements? Okay, so you can visit the institute at UPSA and then you submit, you go and make your inquiries, and then know the exemptions that you may be given. But also know that exemptions can be given on a paper by paper basis. Is that okay? Exemptions can be given on a paper by paper basis. So you can visit the institute or give them a call. Okay. Now, any other question? Any other question? Somebody said there's a question in the chat. Or shall we proceed? If you have no questions, if we can proceed. Actually, sometimes your questions may take 60 seconds before they show up, because I have to take time to answer them one after the other. That's why some of you will type, but it will take a little bit of time. Please, I'm open for questions before we move to each of the syllabus requirements and how to crack the papers. So no one has a question for me. Okay. Since there's no question, we can proceed. Can you see my screen? Can you see my screen? Can you see my screen? Hello? Hello? Okay. So we look at the exam timetable. Most of the time, for CIT, the exam timetable has remained the same since. Okay, so most of the time, when you're going to write, those writing the professional, I think you have paper on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then Monday for the 6 papers. But for final level one, you write tax audits on Monday most of the time. Then on Thursday, you write oil and gas. Then on the next Monday, that's the following week, you write international taxation. For final level two, you start mostly with strategic tax planning on Monday. Then on Thursday or Friday, you write advanced taxation practice. Then the following Monday, you write tax ethics and administration. That's how the timetable is for CIT. Okay. And every paper mostly starts at 10 a.m. All the papers. Okay. So that is the timetable. Now we have to look at the syllabus. And the syllabus, I'm going to pick some particular papers. I'm not going to focus on all the papers. Okay. I'm going to pick some particular papers. So I'll first start with the professional level, and I'll start with income taxation first. So I won't go paper one, paper two, paper three, just like that. I'll pick. So I have to first start with income taxation and talk about some few issues. Now, I'll skip a little of public sector and come to income taxation. Now, the objective of this paper is to understand the principles of income tax. Now, listen, those writing final level one and final level two, this paper is a requirement. Okay, though some of you have done a bit of taxation in the university or at ICA level, but those who come with ACCA who still get exemptions, they don't also try. I getting it. They don't also try to look at this and try to get it, because once you have ACCA or SEMA or any other professional accounting designation, you are going to be exempted from this, but you are going to use taxation in Ghana to work. And these people struggle a lot with the papers because they do not have a background in this. And also the lawyers also get exemption. Most of them do not have a background in accounting. You see, they start struggling with the calculations. You get it? So you get exemption doesn't mean that is the end. You have to at least have an idea. You get the idea. So here it says what? We should understand the principles of income tax, prepare tax returns, and compute income taxes. Understand, you see, when it was prepared, we're using the Internal Revenue Act, but now it will be what? The Income Tax Act. So though the things have not changed here, the syllabus has actually changed. I get it. So it is implied that any new um, 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 development that comes in taxation, it applies to your exam. Though the syllabus has not changed, it still applies. We are not using the Internal Revenue Act. However, under every tax law, there's something we call transitional provisions. So, transitioning from the old law to the new law, there are some things that can still be applied. Are you getting it? If you can't find any reference in the new law, you can apply what was in the old law when you are faced with that situation. So, you refer to the transitional provision part of the various tax laws. Okay. Now, the first part is imposition of income tax. So I'll tell you where it is important and whether it applies to final level 1 and final level 2. So these are particular topics. So if you are doing final level 2, when I say it applies to final level 2, write it down because you may need it, right? So I'll mention the particular courses each thing I mention will be relevant. Okay. So for instance, when we come to imposition of income tax, the imposition of income tax on the income of resident and non-resident persons will be more relevant. Are you getting it? This part from business, employment, investment accruing in derived from brought into or received in Ghana will apply to at final one. You will need it for international taxation. You will need it a lot for international taxation. You will also need it for oil and gas. Okay, and tax audit. It applies to all three. Because when it comes to income taxes, is a requirement. You must know the basis of income tax. Section 1. Tax is payable in Ghana if the person has chargeable income for the year or has received the final withholding payment. Not so. When he has a chargeable income, he will be taxed at what? The rate specified in the first schedule, and then we can less any foreign tax credit. Now, this is the basic requirement. Everybody needs to know this for all your papers. Now, at the final level two, this imposition of income tax is also it also cuts across all your papers. So everything here, so distinction between chargeable income, assessable income, calculation of chargeable income still applies, especially for tax audits and oil and gas. For international tax, most of the time you may not be doing calculations. That doesn't mean they can't bring calculations. It's in the syllabus. Okay, you can calculate foreign tax credits, just that they want to make it more of an advisory paper. That is why most of the time they do not bring those kind of calculations. But in the past, sometimes you open and you see foreign tax credit, you calculate it, right? And to get foreign tax credit in accordance with section 112, subsection 2, and the relinquishment of foreign tax credit under the subsection 3 of section 112, you need to know how to compute assessable income and chargeable income, get the average tax rate in Ghana against the effective tax rate in the foreign country, find the difference, and do your computation. Now, for final level 2, especially under advanced taxation practice, this thing you must master it. You must become a master of this because every night you're going to meet a question from there. And those doing income tax at the professional level 2, there's always a question around this area. Okay. Now, when you come to deductions allowed and not allowed, almost all your paper you need it because even under petroleum calculations, they may sometimes bring deductions that are allowed and those that are not allowed. You have to fish out the irrelevant information from the relevant data that you have been given. And you need to also know the residual deduction rule. This residual deduction rule is what we call wholly, exclusively, and necessarily incurred under Section 9 of the Income Tax Act. Okay, you must know the difference between capital expenditure and revenue expenditure. Exempt income under Section 7 and other types of exempt income in the the syllabus or in the Income Tax Act as well, right? So exempt income industry concessions, that's the SIT schedule, and then the treatment of tax losses under section 17, that's unrelieved losses or what we call carry forward losses, and there are a bit of financial cost deductions, which are also losses. They are also losses under the law. So section 16, and you can refer to section 131 for a more in-depth understanding, and a bit of section 25 for foreign currency instruments. Then we have donations to a worthwhile cause under section 100. Okay, so these things for those doing final level 2 is even more important than those doing final level 1, because you'll be using these things all the time. But now at your level, these same things are there, but yours is more practical because yours might be case related, while the people at professional level will not be case related, but will be more of theory and a bit of calculation. But yours will be case related. They can bring a case where you have to deduce what is going on. Then when it comes, you have to know provisional and self-assessment. Simply know assessment under the tax law, the different kinds of assessment. So we have government assessment or administrative assessment, and we have self-assessment. Before, in our old law, there was no self-assessment. It was mostly provisional assessment, where the authority gives you the assessment. Assessment means determining your tax liability. So the authority will now what? Give you a liability, then you pay, right? So whether you like it or not, you have to pay. But sometimes you can raise exemption, you can object to the assessment. But now, because of tax audit, we have self-assessment. You can assess yourself for taxes and submit it. So through this, the provisional assessment or simply the administrative assessment are broken into different ones. We have what we call preemptive assessment, where even if it's not time for you to pay the taxes, we can assess you for tax and let you pay based on some circumstances or based on some information that we have received. You file taxes before your due date and pay taxes or leave a security before the due date, right? So we mostly call it preemptive assessment and security, and it can be found in the Revenue Administration Act. Then we have your adjusted assessment. Sometimes the one you submit will not be accepted and some information will be required to adjust it. Then a final one will be issued for you. We call it a final assessment. I get it. So these are assessment. You need to know assessment. Sometimes questions that can be asked may be theory. They'll ask you, why are we gradually shifting from provisional assessment to more of self-assessment? This is a common question that is asked, and it can be asked under tax administration. It can be asked under tax audit. Most of the time, these are the two papers that you should mostly be expecting this, and even advanced tax practice. Yes, why are we moving gradually from provisional assessment to self-assessment? For capital allowance and other deductions and reliefs, every paper, very important. Even in international tax, you may be required, if only it has to do with what? Somebody who is a foreigner who has brought income to Ghana and is also deriving income from the country, then he may have some capital allowances. You can still compute. So for allowances and deductions, don't say, hey, this is international taxation, I don't have to know. No, you still have to know, because sometimes they may bring a foreign setting into our domestic law. Now, let me tell you something. When it comes to international tax or international tax planning, it is two issues. It's either you are taxing a foreigner in your country, a foreigner in Ghana, meaning non-resident taxation, or you are taxing a Ghanaian who is in a foreign country. You get it? So it's either what? Taxation of what? Worldwide income of a resident, or taxation of a source income of a non-resident. You get it? That's the whole basis of international tax. When you understand it like this, it's easier. Okay, so with this said, this one mostly cuts through all the papers, but there are specific ones that are specific to some particular papers. Now, when it comes to taxation of employment income, you need to know the definition of employment, primary, consecutive, primary, and secondary employment. These are more theoretical. Most of the time, at the advanced levels, that's I'm talking about advanced tax practice. Yes, some theory can come, but mostly at the income tax level, at the professional level, they are just going to ask you in theory, because here it's more about theory and a bit of computation, right? But at the advanced level, most of the time, this employment income will come as pure computation, and it won't come as employment alone. It will mostly come as employment together with business or other investment income. Okay, so you get an individual who maybe is employed, he also has a pig farm, and he's also investing in some treasury bills somewhere. You are going to put all that income together. So you have employment, business, and investment. Sometimes mostly employment and business. That's how the questions come. Now, then tax reliefs and tax reliefs cards, mostly under advanced tax practice, you are going to what? Be looking at them. The retirement contributions, return of income of individual with two or more employments. That's what I was telling you. You can get two employments or employment and business, employment and investment. All these things should be considered. Then withholding taxes by employers, the payee system, calculation of employment tax liability, equivalent cash payment, perquisites of office. No, perquisites are things that are like benefits that you enjoy. Are you getting it? Like your employer paying utility bills, your employer paying your rent, and all those other benefits that you enjoy from your employment. They are perquisites of office. Are you getting it? So these are some of the things, and the treatment of retirement fund savings and contribution to a retirement fund, withdrawal from your retirement fund. This one, most of the time, you are going to get it here because it's about income tax. Everything will be focused on income tax. But at advanced tax practice level, you can get income taxation questions like this, and they will chip in a bit of indirect taxes. Like somebody, the person had some VAT, he has some business, and there are some VAT returns. He didn't file them, or the amount he filed on the VAT returns differs from what he did on his financials. I get it. So these are some of the things that you should mostly be expecting. Now, when it comes to taxation of individuals, partners, and partnerships, um, at this level, very important, and also at advanced tax practice level, very important, because that one can come as a full question where you have to compute or a bit of theory under the calculations. Now, one thing every student should know and be careful is that when you get any computation in taxation, the whole thing doesn't end there. It doesn't end there. After the calculation, you need to tell us why you did what you did. That is how tax questions are answered. Okay, somebody may have seen some repairs. Let's say if you see a question, they say the person has replaced two engines, right? Somebody will say an engine is a major overhaul, right? And because of that, he's going to add it for capital allowance purposes. Another person will say that replacement of an engine is an improvement. And in accordance with section 12, it says that what repairs and improvement. And since this is an improvement, I will subject it to what? The rules of section 12. I will what? Take 5% of the written down value of the pool to which that asset belongs as allowable, and any excess, I'll add it to the pool and capitalize for capital allowance purposes. So you see, two people have different treatment, but assuming these two people have all done the work, they wrote nothing under the paper or nothing after the question, then it doesn't make sense. Because they're all using different, all of them can still get 2020 anyway. It depends on the assumption. So under every tax question, make sure you write your underlying assumption that you use to answer the question. And this is why people also fail oil and gas. They go, they do the calculation, they expect to get 50. You are joking. The question itself requires underlying assumptions, right? You do computation of capital allowance 20% straight line. Yes. So you must tell us that in accordance with the Income Tax Act, capital allowance is granted for petroleum and mining companies at 20% straight line or over 5 years. Not so. Then when you are pulling things together, you tell us that in accordance with section 65, not so, exploration and development operations, any revenue and capital expenditure that has been incurred before the commencement of production shall be put into a single pool before commercial production begins. You get it? And therefore, the computation is as follows. You see the way I'm going. So when you are answering, you go along, or after the question, you start what? Put your underlying assumptions down. You are solving a computation of chargeable income question. You've done your profit before tax. You have added depreciation. You have done this. You have done that. You don't just end there. You go forward and tell the examiner that depreciation is added back because it is an excluded expenditure under section 130, and capital allowance is granted instead in line with section 14 and the third schedule. You get it? So that way, when you are answering questions, you feel the flow. You feel like, yeah, you are flowing, and there's no way you are going to fail. But people just do computation, they see 20, they think that's why sometimes you can see a computation. You do about 4 lines, but the max is 20, and you are like, is this small thing a 20 marks? No. They require you to put something under. Right. Why did you do this and that? Why did you take the withholding tax exemption? Tell us. You get the idea. That's how we deal with tax questions. But people don't usually pay attention to those things. Now, another important area which I mostly think most of the time when it comes here, this principle of taxation for companies, shareholders, bodies of persons, and owners is very, very important, especially to advanced tax practice, um, tax administration and ethics, tax audit and investigation, and strategic tax planning. Okay, why? Because here you'll be doing more of computations. For tax audit, you may get you may have to do computations and also write a report. Maybe the person has done computation, you have to recompute. Remember that one of the audit procedures is to recompute what has been computed. So you can compute somebody's income again as against what the person computed and extract differences, which we call the audit variations or variances, right? And go and ask management why those variances, or slap a penalty on the excess or an interest or something. You get it? So this part, whether you like it or not, especially taxation of companies and shareholders and body of persons, this is where issues of financing come in. Remember, when it comes to companies and shareholders and debt holders and the rest, financing comes in. Are you going for debt or equity? Are you going for leasing? I get it. So at this part, mostly for strategic tax planning, there's a part of the exam which has to do with what? Choosing a suitable financing option, right? So am I going for debt? Am I going for equity? Am I going for leasing? Am I buying my assets? How am I financing my working capital? When you go to section 10, it tells you that what you can what treat interest as an allowable deduction. Because of that, people try to what finance most of their business with debt instead of equity, which yields dividend, right? Now, when it comes to interest, you can only deduct interest if the interest came from a debt obligation, which the law calls. Okay, a debt obligation is simply a loan. I get your money borrowed. So when you go and borrow money and you use that money to finance the purchase of an asset in your business, or you use it to what? Fund your working capital, that is your business, then that interest can be deducted. Because of this, people come up with what? Tax avoidance scenarios, right? To take advantage of that. Because if you say, so far as I use the interest, so far as I use the money to buy an asset in my business or run my business, I get an exemption. People usually what? Use controlled loans. They borrow loans from their parent companies and subsidiaries and other things, right? That's persons in controlled relationship and use it. And so if my profit is 1 million and I go and borrow a loan of 10 million at 10% interest, then that loan will completely write off my profit. That means I won't pay tax for the next 100 years, right? I'll be completely exempt. So when you look at the new income tax bill that has come, they are trying to corner these things by bringing more anti-avoidance provision, tightening the loopholes. Now, when you visit section 128, there's something called persons in controlled relationship. Before, the subsection 2 told us that you have to have at least 50% holding in a company, right? Or through other interposed bodies for you to become a controlled person. But now they've taken the whole thing. So far as you have any relationship with any company in terms of being controlled, whether statutorily or through other mechanisms, is still your controlled party. So this part is very, very important. And you see, introduction to taxation of what? Petroleum and mining companies. You do it at income tax level. So when you go to oil and gas and other minerals taxation, you realize that most of the time people don't focus there a lot, but questions come from there all the time. You go and they ask you what is separate petroleum operation, and then you are like, what is separate petroleum operation? But you would have done it here. Separate petroleum operation is what? A concept or a ring fencing concept which has to do with what? Segregation of your income into separate streams for business, accounting, and taxation purposes or legal purposes, right? And when you come to the Income Tax Act under Section 64, separate petroleum operations come from two particular areas. It comes from what? Either your production and exploration contract itself. So each petroleum contract itself is a separate operation. Because I have two contracts, all of them are separate operations, right? And at the field level, that means even within a contract, on each field is a separate operation. You get it? So we have the field level. So if I have two separate wells that I've dug, there are two separate operations. And it is telling us that if I'm digging a well, an oil and gas well, before the approval of a development plan, you need a development plan before to be approved before you work, right? Or As you are working, you can submit it. So before approval and during approval, if I'm digging this hole, it's the same operation. But if it's another hole or it's another well, then it's what? A completely separate operation. And this is separate petroleum operation. The same way you need to know separate mineral operations. If you have a mine, if you have mines, each mine is a separate mineral operation. And if you have what, two or more mines that share processing facility, they are the same operation. Okay, so there are a lot of them. And if you haven't done income tax, you've taken exemption, you go and you're doing oil and gas, you start to struggle because the concepts don't make sense. So instead of going back to go and see what you've missed and what you need to know and how they relate to other subjects, people go and say tax audit, they go and see excise duty, they say, hey, excise duty, so a syllabus, no, yes, it is part. Tax audit is the controversial paper because it covers everything. We audit everything. So you need to know bits and pieces. That's why I'm telling you, you need to go back to know some of the most important things, like what I'm telling you. These things are very important. Is that okay? Now, when it comes to banks, non-banking financial institutions, most of the time it's advanced tax practice that most of the time you're going to get questions around there, and insurance companies, right? And even at this level, most of the time it's insurance, life insurance, and what general insurance businesses that you're going to get questions for. So for banking, because mostly it's about ring fencing and the procedures are the same, they usually don't want to complicate issues. But that doesn't mean they can't bring bank. I think somewhere 2014 they brought, is it Tips Bank? A very long question. It's a banking question, okay, where you have to compute its chargeable income and all that. But still, the ring fencing concept applies. In our Ghanaian tax law, everything is about ring fencing. Anytime you have two or more streams of income belonging to one person, you have to segregate it. Now, you can find this in Section 1 of the Income Tax Act, Section 2, and Section 3. Everything compute separately, compute separately. That is the nature of our new Income Tax Act. Then we come to the taxation of capital gains. Now, when it comes to capital gains tax, right? Most of the time, you require this under advanced tax practice and strategic tax planning. Most importantly, strategic tax planning. But now in our law, we don't have something like capital gains tax again. It's now tax on gain on realization. Okay. So now, when you realize an asset or sell an asset, destroy it, part with it. That's in accordance with Section 38, conditions for realization. So if you part with an asset, lose ownership of an asset, destroy it, redeem it, exchange it, whatever, then the asset has been deemed to be realized, right? So realization, the tax on that gain when you realize an asset or a liability is very important. For those doing the advanced level, almost all your papers you need it, especially for strategic tax planning, because these are some of the ways people would utilize tax planning mechanism. Realization is one of the ways GRA loses a lot of money every year, because how many people will actually sell assets and notify GRA? So they are very wild when it comes to realization. When you look at the new income tax bill, even lottery winnings now, before lottery winnings were exempt, right? But now lottery winnings themselves are part of business income. They are part of investment income now. You get it? Yes, because they lose a lot of money from realization. So that is why it is a very strict concept. And it's one of the ways that if you are doing tax planning or you're a tax consultant, you can earn a lot of money from clients, because you can help them to utilize their realization in such a way that they will not pay too much tax, right? So realization is very important. But at tax audit level, it will be more important at tax audit level. And for petroleum, we have what we call assignment of petroleum and mineral rights. Okay, that is also a type of realization. That is also important. Almost every day it appears in oil and gas. So realization is like a big topic in almost all your papers. Okay, when it comes to international tax, realization is not so much important, but it is there under Article 13, capital gains, right? Article 13 under the UN and the OECD model, and sometimes it can shift to Article 14 depending on whether the DTA that Ghana has entered into is with uh, an African country, or is with a developing country, or is with a developed country. Most DTAs with developed countries are based on the OECD model, and those with developing countries are based on the UN model, because that one they want the governments to grow and get more money. So it is more strict than the OECD model. So because of that most of the articles in the DTA shift, right? So Article 13 becomes Article 14 because of a particular article, which is what we call the fees for technical services article, mostly under Article 12A. So mostly if you don't see Article 12A in a DTA entered by Ghana, you see Article 13 as fees for technical services. And this article shifts the other articles. Okay, so capital gains, don't mess with it. You see, I've shown you how capital gains can appear in oil and gas. It can appear in tax audit. That one, they'll tell you to do capital gain procedure. You may compute the gain somebody has computed and compare to what will be done and write a report to your audit senior or maybe to your head of audit or write any tax. You can write procedures, audit procedures, right? So a sample audit procedure which will work is maybe request what the schedule of the gains computed, not so test the arithmetical accuracy of that schedule, take a sample, not so vouch the sample in detail, recompute the gain in line with what section 30, section 35, not so check whether the appropriate tax rate has been added or it has been added to income. So under this level, most of the time when you get capital gains or gains on realization, you either add it to your chargeable income or when you visit the first schedule, okay, I think paragraph 3, you have the option as an individual, if it's an investment gain, to add it to your income or tax it separately at 15%. Okay, so that is the rule when it comes to taxation of gains. So gains, you have to write it down. It's something that you should know for all your papers because everywhere it is there. So ask yourself, how does capital gain apply to oil and gas? How does capital gains apply to tax audit? How does capital gains apply to international tax? Which I gave you what? Um, links to Article 13. Also, there are a bit of it in Article 6 under the OECD UN model and the DTAs, which you call immovable property. Sometimes there's capital gains associated with immovable property. That's realization of immovable property when you sell the immovable property, right? So you can refer to paragraph 4 of Article 6 of the DTAs. Very, very important. Okay, so this is capital gains or realization. I've talked about realization. Very important. If you don't know realization, you don't know tax. Tax, most of the time, when you visit the Tanzanian law, which is like the derivation of the Income Tax Act, they mostly look the same. You realize that realization is a key concept. It's a key concept. And the OECD issued a statement last year on realization because it's a very important concept. So don't miss realization, especially I'm speaking specifically to those doing final two. Final two realization is very, very important, especially for strategic tax planning, because always there's a full question on realization, okay? Whether it comes from realization of business, that's changes in ownership in line with Section 62, or whether it comes as a normal realization where you are preparing to sell your asset or whatever, be prepared. So that's about realization. Now there's the taxation of gifts for those doing income tax. And gifts, most of the time you don't see it often, but they are important because the Income Tax Act was not like the Internal Revenue Act, where gifts, we have to know the value of gift under Section 43 and the rest. No, now we can still apply those as a transitional provision, but now when you get a gift under employment, it's added to employment income. When you get a gift under business, it's added to business income, right? But when you get a gift under investment, that is where the rule change. That is where you have the option to tax it separately at 15% or you add it to your income. But for business and employment gifts, they are added to the various incomes. That is why you don't mostly see questions on gifts, except under ICA, principles of taxation. You're going to get questions on gift tax where you have to. Is that okay? That is it. So gift tax is also equally important. But if a question will come on gift tax, then expect it under advanced taxation practice or maybe a bit of strategic tax planning where it can come with capital gains. Okay, so that is it. Now, when it comes to accounting and finance, one thing I would want you to pay close attention to for those doing this paper, I mean the professional level, is that you see there are some things that you don't see here but are important for the exam. For instance, when you look at the syllabus, there's nothing about double entry. But if you don't know double entry, you can't do accounting. There's nothing about receivable accounting, all that. But you need them. Now, one thing you should know is that this paper is a combination. It's the biggest syllabus. The syllabus is very broad. It's a combination of accounting and financial management. That's why it says accounting and finance. Look at this syllabus. Talks about partnerships, and the partnerships itself is the broadest so far. Talks about amalgamation, dissolution, admission, consequences of debt, conversion into a limited liability company. Now, the reason why you are doing this is mostly for tax audit and investigation, because under tax audit, you need accounting before you can examine somebody's accounting statements. Do you understand? So we are saying that amalgamation of firms, dissolution, admission of a new partner, consequences of the death of a partner, conversion, you need it. Okay, then when it comes to limited liability, you need to know consolidated financial statement. And their console is not just the simple console, it's complex with group structures, complex groups are even in the syllabus, but they prefer you do the simple one. Okay, I mean, with a single subsidiary, simple, joint ventures, associated businesses. So together with associates, balance sheet P&L. So it's not a small syllabus. Then with interpretation of financial statement, preparation. So for those doing tax audit, I think most of them lack skills in this. And this is the most important area for tax audit. Interpretation of financial statement. That's what we use for analytical procedures, identifying red flags, doing audit risk assessment. So for risk assessment, we call something risk profiling and risk prioritization. Sometimes for identification of risk, you need to get the financial statement of a taxpayer and conduct risk assessment based on his financials. For instance, you see a taxpayer has high gearing, he has a lot of debt, or debt to equity ratio is very high. That tells you that this guy will be paying very high interest, and very high interest is going to reduce profit. Reducing profit is going to reduce tax. This is a risky taxpayer because he's not going to give GRA the money that he wants. The client is in the tech industry. Revenue is what? Not stable. Revenue is fluctuating. This is a risk, because if revenue is fluctuating, it might be that this guy is manipulating the account. If his cost is too low, if he has high expense to turnover ratio, this could be a trigger for a tax audit. So that is why I'm telling people that as a tax or accounting professional, ratios are what you depend on. Everything is about ratios. Some people are here as and now, they don't know how to compute ratios, but they call themselves accountants. It's very bad, because this analysis is what you use to work. When you look at the definition of accounting, it says what? Accounting is what? The what? Uh, Communication of events in monetary terms involving what, or including the recording, summarizing, classification, analyzing, interpretation. All these things are part of accounting. Not so, and they will all be quantified in monetary terms. So if you don't know how to do analysis, then your journey of accounting is not complete, because analysis is very important. So at the advanced level, that is for final level 1, final level 2, you don't need anything. Final level 2, you don't need anything around this area. But final level 1 for tax audit, yes, fine. You need interpretation of financial statement. And every day, some way, somehow, interpretation is there. It doesn't mean that you are going to interpret directly like what you do here, but they may bring somebody's statement and ask you what could be the potential risk areas. It's analysis that you are doing, or tell us why revenue is changing. Tell us why its cost of sales is fluctuating. All these things are the reasons why you need to know this. Now, this syllabus is broad. So for those doing accounting and finance, don't joke at all. This is the time you have to start learning. And you can't depend completely on the lecturer, because look at the syllabus. No, just look at the syllabus. Some of these things are written as one line, but amalgamation alone is not easy. Very broad, because there are bits and pieces of amalgamation, like goodwill, revaluation, how in terms of goodwill happen, all that. Okay, you have to dissolve the old company, open a new one. Now, apart from that, there's business valuation, preparation and presentation of accounts relating to offer for sale, right issue, profit forecast. Some of these things, even some of the tutors will now have information about them, because they are old. This form of accounting books nowadays, you can't get them. You will search for them and you don't even know what they mean. So sometimes the exam too, because they know it's quite complex, they don't bring the complex parts. But the students themselves are not learning. Don't wait for a lecturer to spoon feed you. Look for information. Buy books. Somebody has one textbook and he feels he's okay. I have more than 25 textbooks and I'm still buying more. Yes, of course, you need knowledge. If you are stuck in this profession, you always have to be updating yourself. They say buy book, then you are complaining. But you rely on the lecturer. The lecturer will not teach you 100%. The actual thing is the lecturer has to do 30%, you do 70. But most of us, we are always doing 80 and 90%. You do 10%, and so I ask them. It's a very big problem. And these are some of the problems we face with students. They don't learn. They don't want to learn. They want you to give them the eba. If we know the eba cry, we will not tell you. You have to learn. If you think your lecturer knows the eba, then he will just give it to you and go and sleep. Why will he teach again? So I beg you, learn. Okay, so we have specialized transaction. Another big area here, high purchase and leases. Leasing alone is a big syllabus. IFRS 16, IAS 17. Before high purchase itself come, high purchase branch, high purchase stock account, high purchase suspense account, all those things. Branch account, you deal with autonomous branch, you deal with dependent branch, foreign currency transactions under IAS 21. You have to know how to tax foreign currencies alone, foreign currency transactions, and you have to know how to, I said tax, deal with foreign currency or foreign operations, which is foreign branch at this level. Here, you will not have foreign operation under foreign subsidiary and foreign joint ventures and the rest. So it's a big syllabus. Then when it comes to financial management alone, you have to know the nature and purpose and scope, sources of finance. You have to know gearing, that's capital structure decisions, working capital management, investment appraisal, including sale and lease back, lease or buy decisions, basic appraisal. Charlie, the syllabus is packed. Effect of taxation and inflation in investment appraisal, preparation of forecast financial statement and interpreting their significance. Financial forecasting, that's cash forecasting and financial forecasting, and dealing with risk and uncertainties. This is where you do risk management, know how to manage them, hedging. All these things are in this. So this syllabus, accounting and finance, is the most complex paper at this level. Though it's not difficult, but it's a lot. It's a lot. So with this one, the key takeaways in the papers I was talking about is what I've talked to you about. That's why I didn't mention anything else. Okay. So some of these areas under the finance, like gearing, impact of gearing, and then the lease or buy, sale and lease back, effect of taxation and inflation on investment decisions. You may need them for strategic tax planning, but not as detailed as this one. That one mostly, because they don't want to confuse you, they mostly do not bring long-term tax planning. They do short-term tax planning. So it's within a year. So you are not mostly going to do this. The only time you will need this is taxation and MPV analysis, which is the time variable of tax planning, ability to shift taxes into the future, right? So most of the time, I think section 46, there's a bit of that there, which is replacement assets. Those ones are some of the issues they'll bring in the exam, but these ones nowadays they do not bring. But when you look at the old strategic tax planning papers, there was a bit of this in there. Is that okay? So that is it. Now I come to indirect taxation. When it comes to indirect taxation, very important, especially I will not talk plenty because for final level one, tax audit is where you concern yourself with this. Now, petroleum, you don't concern yourself with indirect taxes. They are not going to ever ask you any question on indirect tax. International tax 2 years, because when you look at even the OECD and UN model, it is what? Tax, double tax convention on income and capital. I get in it. So it is mostly on income taxes. But when you go to section, I said 20. Why do I keep saying section? Article 27, it talks about what? Assistance in the collection of taxes. And assisting other revenue bodies to collect taxes also includes indirect taxes. But that doesn't mean they're going to ask you questions on indirect taxes directly. Though it may be part of a full computation, but they are not going to ask you any question on indirect taxes when it comes to final one, except under tax audit. And that wouldn't come as calculation most of the time. But VAT can come as calculation. Okay. So those doing indirect taxes, the theory there you write, but now the calculation is more. So the sources of indirect taxes to the government, the incidence and impact of indirect taxation, the basis of indirect taxation, the principle of no consumption, no duty payment is straightforward. You don't consume, you don't pay duty. The payment of duty once on goods, determination of quantity in containers, packages, and space. This one involves a bit of computation, right, to determine the volume of alcohol and all the. Then we have the principles of VAT, destination-based taxation, origin-based taxation, from the World Trade Organization rules. All these things you need to know them. Then taxable persons and taxable value. So those are the final level two. This is even more important to you than those here, because this is what you are going to use to do your computations if there's calculation. And those doing what do we call it? Tax administration and ethics, you need this a lot, because at your level these things come all the time. It comes all the time, especially taxable persons. Then taxable supply, very important. So this paper is also one. If you take the accounting and finance from there, because a lot of people are exempted, that's why you don't hear people failing, but a lot of people fail this paper, the accounting and finance. Then comes to indirect tax, people fail indirect tax. So far the failure rate for indirect tax is even more than any paper. When you take tax audit and ethics and administration from there, people fail indirect tax, papa, because the syllabus is also very broad. So this professional level, people take exemption, they don't even know what is there. But these are the things that are there, and sometimes you don't know them. You go to the exam and they go and carry them. Okay, so we have taxable supplies, place of supply rules, supply of goods, gift and loans, valuation of taxable supply, imported service, reverse charge, concept of consumption, then VAT accounting. This is what I'm even concerned about, the computation of VAT, okay, including the treatment of bad debt, disposal of capital goods, import VAT, purchase, VAT relief purchase order, VAT refunds, discounts, right? These are the things you need to know, especially for those doing advanced tax practice at final level two and those doing tax audit, because you may need this. There's a particular question which has been repeated in tax audit for over 20 times, yet students can still not answer that question. It's very funny. It's on a is VAT and customs question, right? Where you have to write a report. Okay, they mostly bring it. Tom and Jerry Company with Mrs. Kimpane and Co. That is the question. Okay, they keep bringing it, and still student cannot do it well, compute the VAT well, compute the customs duty well, and write the report to their audit supervisor. It's a real pain in the ass. This is a very bad how do we call it, behavior of students, something that has come over and over and you can still answer. That means you are not learning. That's what you are telling them. Then when it comes to CST, mostly it's been long since I saw a question on CST, but that doesn't mean it will not come. CST can be mixed with a VAT question, because mostly if you are going to compute VAT and the person is in the communication service industry, let's say it's with a telecom, and you are computing the VAT, you have to include CST in the computation. Though the question may be silent, but you may be required to compute CST. Now, CST, yes, tax audit as usual. You may be asked a question on CST. And then at the advanced level, CST there, ebeba. CST can be asked because it's part of your syllabus. Okay. Now, when it comes to the indirect tax level, you may do computation on CST, but more importantly, know the theory around CST, what CST is, who holds a class one license, what is the rate for CST, what is communication service itself, what constitute communication service, and what is required. Okay, so these are the things that you need to actually know. Okay, now when it comes to customs, excise duties, controls, and special taxes, very important. Now this one I'll give a thumbs up to tax administration and ethics. Most of the time that is where these things are going to be asked. Okay, because almost every night you get questions on import and export controls, customs warehousing. It appears all the time. Free zones, tariff classification, import clearing procedures. These things are mostly done under tax ethics and administration all the time. But when it comes to tax audit, the excise duty type part and the custom duty computation can come in tax audit. But now, since the new examiner came, we haven't seen much of that. But the one I was talking about, the VAT question with the customs computation and the procedures has come before. At least it has come 3 times and counting, because it's still yet to come. This, like, maybe it may come, we don't know. But the whole thing is that these are the papers that we require this thing. So this paper too is packed, it's pumped. But how do you pass indirect tax? Now that is the question. How do you pass this indirect tax question? Indirect tax you can pass by doing relational computations, right? So you are solving the question, you ask yourself, okay, what if this is chipped in? How do we deal with it? Okay, so solve, solve, solve. Then also try to implement your own, try to shift in some things. What if they brought a supply of COVID-19 goods inside this question? How would I deal with it? You see, if you learn like that, you have a higher chance of passing than those who just take question and solve, and that is it. So if the thing comes and they change the structure, then the person starts struggling, which is very bad. Which is very bad. You get it? So these are some of the things that I want you to be looking at if you want to pass. And those who are doing indirect tax, make sure you get good books. It's a requirement. Getting good books is a requirement. Is that okay? Getting good books is a requirement. So that is about indirect tax. Now, because of time, people have work to do and other things. We have to speed up a little. When it comes to revenue and business law, very, very important. Now, there's a bit of revenue law inside there. That's tax policy, tax reform, fiscal policy, tax jurisdiction for the international dimensions. This syllabus is so broad. So the three key papers, as when we started, I told you, was what? Income, accounting and finance, indirect tax, and revenue and business law. These are the most failed papers. Okay, because the syllabus is broad. This one even goes to the extent of bringing banking, partnership law, insurance law, other financial law. See, the security industry law here, Ghana Stock Exchange law, investment code, insurance law, banking law. And even when you go through this alone, it's like the whole banking act. This alone is like the whole insurance act. It's it's quite heavy. It's quite heavy. But the examiner wants to make sure people pass it. So usually the questions they bring are mostly around partnership, normal business law, doctrine of ultra vires, lifting the corporate veil, debt and equity financing, then the basic income tax, then a bit of company taxation, law of contracts, the court system in Ghana. Okay, so they are usually around that. They don't want people to fail because people are failing this paper too much. Those who don't get exempting in this paper, for brepa, because this paper can be a headache. Because how can you be reading banking law all to go to the exam and you go and see insurance law there? It's not fair. Okay, so this is what sometimes you have to respect those at the professional level. It's not been easy for them because most of you have exemptions. You don't feel their pain. It's not easy. It's not easy. A lot of people can actually relate that at this level, Charlie, it's not been easy. It's quite difficult. It's like what you did in your whole degree that they've packed here for them that they should do. I think if they can reduce the syllabus a little, we'll be happy because it's a lot. It's a lot. And even the period will not be enough to cover them. But we try our best, and the pass rate has also been very high. We thank God. Now, the last paper we'll talk about is strategy and governance. A lot of people don't get exemption from this paper in indirect tax most of the time, especially when you are coming from an accounting related background. You don't get exemption from these papers. Strategy and governance, indirect tax. That's why you mostly do not hear of the other papers because mostly it's those who have a background in accounting that pursue taxation. That pursue taxation. But if not, then accounting and finance and what do we call it? What do we call it? The paper I mentioned earlier, revenue and business law, people fail a lot. The reason why I didn't mention public sector economics and finance is because that paper, though it's quite complex, it's a bit how do we call it? Appealing. Yes, of course, because that one they don't make it so strict, and with a little effort you can pass. So I didn't talk about it because the relationship it bears with other papers is minimal because that is actually the the framework of fiscal policy, right? You know, fiscal policy, that is how government manipulates taxation and public expenditure to stabilize and control the economy. Is that okay? So, for instance, we have fiscal policy is two types. It could be a discretionary fiscal policy or it can be a contractionary fiscal policy. So, government, I told you earlier, uses taxation and public expenditure to control the economy. So, this discretionary fiscal policy may be a contractionary one or an expansionary one. So sorry, the first one I said discretionary and it should be discretionary and automatic stabilizers. Those are fiscal policies which are created themselves. They automatically stabilize the economy through actions that the economy itself takes. For instance, we know that when employment rate inflation increases, there's going to be unemployment or there's going to be increase in salaries or something. That one is automatically stabilized. It stabilizes by itself. Nobody is controlling it. But the ones that government controls themselves are the ones that we call the discretionary one. That's why we say discretionary fiscal policies by discretion of government to control public expenditure. So when the economy is booming, is doing very well, the government has to what? Increase taxes, right? And reduce public expenditure so that the too much money in people's hands will go into taxation, right? So that it will bring the economy to a stable level. And when there's recession in the economy, the government is going to what? Expand the economy. That's what we call expansionary fiscal policy. You rather increase public expenditure and reduce taxation. Okay, so this is the basis of the tax that we are learning. So this taxation is what we are learning. So that is how it relates to public sector economics and finance. Now, the finance part most of the time is public debt and all those other things, which bear little relationship with some of the other courses. That's why I didn't talk much about them. But the fiscal policy part, the Keynesian fiscal policy rules are very important actually to your syllabus. But we are not usually going to see questions on them directly. But those doing business law, fine. You may get a little bit of when those doing direct tax and direct taxes, importance of the difference between direct and indirect taxes, and the rest, very important. Now, for strategy and governance, a bit of pieces will be needed for strategic tax planning. Because of the word strategic tax planning, you need to know the hierarchy, some of these principles and how they help in tax planning, objectives, business objectives, the balance scorecard, business risk for tax risk at the strategic tax planning level. But at this level, almost everything in strategy, this is also very broad. Okay. And this paper, well, people used to fail, but now it's a bit better because now people are opening their eyes to a lot of different books, a lot of videos on YouTube, and good tuition. Actually, our lecturer for strategy is doing very, very well so far. His pass rate has been solid. Together with the other courses, indirect tax and the rest, the guys are doing very, very well. You can give them a round of applause. The professional level, they are doing very well with their gigantic and enormous pass rates. They are doing very well. But this syllabus is also broad because you have to know strategic analysis, implementation, and evaluation, right? Which is strategic management. Then from there, you have to look at operations management. So this one is far broader even than what they are doing at ICA, but that one is more practical. But at this level, what you are going to do is you are going to learn more of the theory. Here, they don't bring most cases. The cases are mini, mini cases. If anything, so mini, like theory type, right? Instead of a long case. But the syllabus is broad because here you'll be doing operations management, you'll be doing marketing management, you'll be doing service management, you'll be doing human resource management, okay, and then corporate governance. So it's very, very broad. So those doing this courses, they must the professional courses, usually it's difficult to get materials. It's difficult to get materials for these ones because some of the materials are not even complete. You get bits and pieces of the materials. But those who want materials and are doing the professional level, feel free to contact me. I have books for all levels. I mean, exam focus manuals for all levels. If you need them, you can reach me. Okay, you can reach me on either my mail or my number. Okay, now we come to final level one. I've already talked about most of the things that we need, but this syllabus, which we see for tax audit, has changed a little. It has changed a little. Well, the framework of auditing, fine, the concept of accountability, audit principles, methods and techniques, independence and the rest, professional legal environment, legal rules, professional guidelines, and ethical aspects of auditing, they are still relevant, and every day bits and pieces of this come. But now it's more related to the tax environment. Okay. So the framework of auditing now will be now the legal and administrative and ethical framework. So here is where you are looking at tax returns, you are looking at assessments, you are looking at things like ethics, the principles of ethics, confidentiality, official secrecy, maintenance of documents, the role and duties of the tax auditor, the principles of tax audit and investigation. You know the basis of tax audit. These are the things that you need to know. Now shift it more to tax. So here I could say that the main focus is around the Revenue Administration Act and the repealed seventh schedule of the Income Tax Act, right? That's where most of the questions are from, together with the ethics, the ethical part, right? So with the ethical part, things like what do we call it? Audit liability. A question like audit liability, they ask you, what is audit liability? When the tax auditor will be sued, how can the tax auditor be sued? Under what circumstances? How does the tax auditor make sure he is not sued? Right? All these things are part of the framework. Then the duties and responsibility of the tax auditor. That's what I was talking about. Here you look at the employment of the tax auditor, all those things, how he can be heard, how he resigns under the Companies Act is still required. So this syllabus is also very broad. But then, if I should rewrite the tax audit syllabus in my own way, let me see. Please hold on for me. I want to rewrite the audit syllabus. Uh, okay, so if we should rewrite the audit syllabus in our own way, if I should break this into 5 questions, most questions will always come from the legal and administrative framework. Okay, and the legal and administrative framework is what. See, sorry, I think I have to. Okay, so we can see here. I hope you can all see my screen. So when it comes to tax audit, why is this not working? I think I'm using a white. So, yeah, okay, so when it comes to tax audit, okay, so for tax audit, we can look at the legal and administrative or legal, administrative, and ethical framework. Legal, administrative, and ethical framework. Two, the next part I'll talk about is the tax audit process. Okay, so let's just start with tax audit planning or tax audit planning, which we call pre-audit research. Called pre-audit research. Then the third part of the syllabus we would want to talk about is field work and investigation. Field work and investigation. Okay, then we have the review and reporting stage. Then finally, we can look at miscellaneous areas, or let me just call it tax audit investigation. Okay, or just tax investigations. Okay, so if I'm to break my syllabus down for tax audit into question 1 through to question 5, I'll break it like this, right? So we have the legal and administrative and ethical framework, tax audit planning or pre-audit research, field work and investigation, review and reporting stage of the audit, and tax investigations. So this one, there's actually a full breakdown of what goes into this, what you are supposed to know, how you are supposed to crack the code. Okay, so tax audit, this is the whole tax audit in 5 questions. Okay, so each area has a detailed breakdown or things you are mostly supposed to know. Okay, and this is what tax audit entails. So all that long syllabus that we saw, this is how I've broken it down. So included in the legal and administrative framework is the introduction to tax audit. Okay, what a tax audit is, who is a tax auditor, the stakeholders for a tax audit, importance of tax audit. We look at what the legal framework, that is the element of the tax audit legal framework. That's the various tax laws that cover tax audit. We have to look at tax returns, selecting a taxpayer for an audit under Section 36 of the Revenue Administration Act. Then the ethical framework, which is the ethics, the code of ethics, which is the principle of objectivity, integrity, confidentiality, competence, and duty and professional behavior, and the threats to those what ethical principles. Then the consequences to ethical unethical behavior by tax auditors. Then the principle of confidentiality alone can be further broken down under official secrecy under Section 7 of the Revenue Administration Act. From there, we come to the tax audit process. Now, tax audit has 4 stages. Okay, 4 principal stages of a tax audit are the ones I've written here. Okay. So as part of fieldwork and investigation, there's another stage. So the first stage is the pre-audit research. Okay. Pre-audit research. Pre-audit research. Then we have what we call the fieldwork stage, as you can see there. Fieldwork stage, and this constitutes 60% of your exam most of the time. Then the third one is working paper documentation. Okay, you are going to work with working papers. So working paper documentation is the third stage. Then finally is the reporting stage of the tax audit. So these are the 4 stages of a tax audit. And these 4 stages, every night, questions will appear bits and pieces from all stages of the tax audit, especially from the field work, the reporting and working paper stage, most of the time. That is where you'll be getting most of your questions from. But the planning too pops up once a while with the legal and administrative and ethical framework. Okay, so these are the 4 stages of the tax audit. Okay, that you need to know about and how I have restructured the syllabus. Now, for tax audit investigations, there are a lot of things that go there. A lot of people don't even know those things are in their syllabus. So things like, first of all, tax investigations. You need to know what tax investigations or audit investigations are. Okay, you need to know assurance engagement. Okay, assurance engagement are there. You need to know non-audit assignments like forensic audits, and its procedures, non-audit assignments like due diligence assignments, fraud investigation, compliance checks or compliance verification. Then we have the other one, compilation agreement. Okay, so when it comes to or compilation agreement or compilation engagement, when it comes to the tax audit investigation or the tax investigation stage, these are the type of investigations that you have to read on. These are the types of investigation that you have to read on and be prepared to deal with. Okay, So most of the tax audit books focus just on the audit and they make it more like ICA related. But with tax audit, you see the process is quite different. If you even look at the structure, you see it's a bit different than what those who did accounting did. Yes, that is how you have to learn tax audit to pass. But if you relate it to more of the statutory audit, you are going to miss a lot of pointers. That is how it's supposed to be. Because this is a syllabus walkthrough, I'm just walking you through the syllabus. I'm not going to go in depth to teach you exactly what should go there. That's why I've broken the syllabus down into something simple for you so that you can always remember this. I hope that is fair. So, the next thing I will talk about is oil, gas, and other minerals taxation. And other minerals taxation. Now, when it comes to oil and gas, if I should break the syllabus down from the previous one based on trend, you can see that always you have to look at crude oil, pricing of crude oil, and petroleum operations. Okay, so every night one of these will definitely appear. Okay, so what is crude oil? How is crude oil priced? Petroleum operations. There are three types of petroleum operations in Ghana, not in the whole world. Some parts they categorize according to offshore and onshore only. But in Ghana, we have three main petroleum operations. We have the upstream sector, we have the midstream sector, and we have the downstream sector. Okay. These are the three. Then we have to learn how to price crude oil. Crude oil is priced based on what we call benchmark crude. Okay, they are like particular yardsticks we use to measure other crude oils, mostly based on demand and supply, based on speculation, based on the price of a barrel of other crude oil, which are known as the marker crude or the benchmark crude, based plus or minus a differential based on the price and weight of cargo and the rest. All these things you have to know them. So this is the first part. Then the second part of oil and gas is basically the fiscal regime. Okay, we call it the fiscal regime of oil and gas. And fiscal regime is basically how government enters into contract with these oil and gas companies. Okay, so that's the fiscal regime. That's the fiscal regime of oil and gas. Okay, every day there's a question coming here. And this fiscal regime, we have, you could say, three main fiscal regime. We have the production sharing contract. You need to know about it. The production sharing contract or the production sharing agreement. We have the concession or the royalty tax system or the license system. We have service contracts. And now the hybrid system. Okay. Then apart from this, you need to know the various fiscal elements. Okay, so you need to know the fiscal elements here. That's how government makes money or how revenue is shared between government and the oil contractors or the oil and gas companies. Then we need to know distribution of crude oil, always a key area of your exam. Every night, distribution of crude oil appears in your exam. Okay, so you should know how to distribute crude oil. So as part of the fiscal regime, these are some of the things you need to know. Then there's another aspect which is very important, which is petroleum revenue management. Okay, it's a full area in your syllabus. Petroleum revenue management, which is based on the Petroleum Revenue Management Act. Every night there's a question on that. Then if I should go to 4, I will come to the principles of taxation for petroleum operations. Okay, so under the principles of taxation, one those from the Income Tax Act. Okay, those from the Income Tax Act from section 63 to, I think, is it 60? think it's 60, 70 something, 76 or so, 75, right? Then we have the principle of unitization. Even unitization can be put as part of the fiscal regime. Unitization and redetermination. You have to look at other principles like separate petroleum operation. Those ones are the income tax principles. And then stability agreements. Stability agreements, whether you like it or not, these things will be appearing for you. And some people don't even know things like this are there for them to know. So I've broken it into four. Now, the fifth part of the syllabus has to do with principles of taxation for minerals. Okay. Principles of taxation for mineral operations. Okay. So this is the oil and gas syllabus in a summary. Okay. And if you want to crack it, this syllabus is according to my own analysis and my experience, together with help from my tutors and my team, right? Over the years, this is what we've come up with. And we've been doing this for over half a decade. And this is what we can say that have come up from our own analysis. Okay. If you master these techniques, there's no way you're actually going to falter in the exam. That is it. Okay, so that is oil and gas. After that, I'll leave room for some questions. Okay, because people are hungry and some people also have to go about other activities. So I'll keep it simple and short. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is international taxation, paper that people fear. Now, when it comes to international taxation, I'll break it up for you. The same way, we'll first start by looking at double taxation. Double taxation is a main area in your exam. So, double taxation and its connecting factors. Let me call it that way. So, double taxation and connecting factors. Okay, this one has a lot of things under it, including DTAs and all that. Then, the next thing will be taxation of income. Okay, and taxation of income will have to do with both passive income. Okay, so passive income, you are looking at various articles under the DTA. That's Article 6, immovable property, Article 10, dividends, Article 11, interest, Article 12, royalties. Under the UN model, we want Article 12A, that's fees for technical services. We want Article 13, we want capital gains. We want Article 18, pensions. And a bit of Article 21, other income. Okay. So there are some other income that may be passive income. So these are the passive income articles. Then when it comes to active income, there are various articles that you need. We need business profits under Article 7. Need business profits. Article 8, shipping and air transport businesses. Shipping and air transport business or international traffic. We have Article 14 under the UN model. Under the OECD model, this has been deleted. So, independent personal services. Article 15, that's employment income. Article 16, that's director's fees. Article 17, which is artists and sportsmen. Article 19, which has to deal with students. Hey, I said student. Government service, sorry. Government service. Those who work as government officials. Government service. Then Article 20, students. Okay. So apart from this one, the second part, which I should have brought before this one, is definitions. Okay, so these are the definitional parts of the DTAs. Okay, and in this one, there are three articles, mostly general definitions and Article 3. General definitions and Article 3. Most of the time, the examiner will say, explain these terms in accordance with Article 3. Okay, then general definitions, then comes residence and Article 4. Then we have permanent establishment. Permanent establishment under Article 5. Now, these articles pop up every day, especially with PE and residence. Whether I like it or not, PE is very broad, and every day there's supposed to be PE in your exam. PE is one of the reasons why you are doing international tax, because permanent establishment can only be owned by a non-resident in your state, right? And you need to know the principles that govern permanent establishment. Okay, so that is permanent establishment under Article 5. So these are the three areas. Now, when we get to 4, let me go to another page. Now, when it comes to 4, I'll talk about special provisions. Now, when we talk about special provisions have to do with non-discrimination for tax purposes, non-discrimination. So this is literally like the administrative and legal part of the DTA. So non-discrimination, mutual agreement procedures, exchange of information, and not all DTAs have the last one, which is the assistance in collection of taxes. Okay, so the assistance in collection of taxes. So these are the areas. Then finally, I'll talk about interpretation of tax treaties. Okay, interpretation of tax treaties. So these are the areas that as a student you need to know. Especially these three, every night they mostly appear. This one is rare, but it can appear, especially together with section 98, because that also gives provision for international arrangements in our law, and also assistance in the collection of taxes from foreign competent authorities or foreign tax authorities. Okay, that is it. So that's it. Then the next phase will have to do with transfer pricing. Okay, so transfer pricing, and let me just put it, an anti-avoidance provisions. Okay, I'm just breaking it into 5 areas. So for transfer pricing too, is broad. It's very broad. So your syllabus is packed. So for transfer pricing, you need to know the arm's length principles, its application, its application, and alternatives to the arm's length principle. You also have to know comparability analysis, which mostly comes with a transfer pricing report, and then transfer pricing methods. These are the key ones for your exam. Apart from that, there's corporate resource sharing, like intra-group services, intangibles, business restructuring, financing arrangements, which is new in your transfer pricing regulations LI 2412. Okay. Then finally, transfer pricing documentation. So this is your international taxation syllabus. For the anti-avoidance is the one in our law, think capitalization and the rest. Those are the ones that they can ask you. So this is the international tax syllabus. You can put it down. I'll meet you in about 1 or 2 minutes. Okay. So that's about international taxation and final one. So it's time for questions. It's time for questions. Before we start with final two. Yes, it's time for questions. It's time for questions before we start with final two. Yes, any questions? Any questions? Any questions? Please, you can post it in the chat column before we proceed. Nobody has posted so far. We need to move. So, any question? Okay. Since there's no question, can we proceed to final level two? Can we proceed to final level two? Now, before we proceed to final level two, I think people might be tired. Let's break. So, I'm going to end it on YouTube. And then the next phase, my tutors will be coming in to also introduce themselves, talk a bit about themselves, and what they will be doing. Okay, what they'll be doing. And with that one, we are going to do it directly on Team Link and not YouTube. Is that okay? So I'm going to end the YouTube session for now and then take some I think it's now, what is the time now? It's 12. So 12:30 we are all going to converge back here, but we will not do it on YouTube. I'll share the team link. I'll share the team link with you on the platform so that you can join. I hope it was a rather effective section. So I'm ending the stream now. Oh, 12:30 we return, but we'll use Team Link. We'll not stream on YouTube.